I want you to think about someone you love. Not in a vague way, I mean specifically. Picture their face, the way they laugh, the way they text you back too fast when something's wrong because they don't want you to worry, the way they say I'm fine when they are absolutely, clearly not fine and you know it and they know you know it but neither of you says anything because what do you even say? Now I want you to imagine getting a call about that person. Not a "hey, are you okay" call, not even a "something happened, come to the hospital" call. I mean the kind of call that makes your legs stop working. The kind where the person on the other end says something and your brain just refuses to process it. Where you're standing in a parking lot or a kitchen or a school hallway and someone is talking to you and you are nodding but you are not there anymore. You left. Some part of you just packed up and left your own body because what they're telling you cannot be real. That is the call that Vanessa Santiago's family got on the morning of May 29th, 2024. And here's what makes this story different from every other story you've heard like it. Her family saw it coming. Not in some vague, in hindsight, looking back there were signs kind of way. They saw it, they said it out loud, they begged her, they showed up, they picked her up, they took her kids, they called the police themselves. They did everything that every article and every hotline and every well-meaning person tells you to do when someone you love is in danger. And it still wasn't enough. Vanessa Santiago was 29 years old. She had two little boys. She had a mother who loved her so fiercely that when officers tried to keep her back from the scene, she had to be physically guided away because nothing was going to stop that woman from getting to her daughter. She had sisters who left work the second they got the news, no questions asked, just moving because that's what you do. She had people. She was surrounded by people who loved her. And she still died alone on the floor of her bedroom with a kitchen knife embedded in her skull. I need you to sit with that for a second before we go any further. Because this story, it's not just a crime story. It is not just another case number, another mugshot, another episode where we talk about what went wrong and shake our heads and move on with our day. This one is going to stay with you. I know that because it stayed with me. I've been doing this for a while now and I still had to step away from this case more than once just to breathe. Because the more you learn about what happened in that apartment in Castleberry, Florida, the more you understand the weeks and months and years that led up to that morning, the more you realize that Vanessa's death was not a surprise. Not to her family, not to the police who had been to that address before, not even, I would argue, to the man who killed her. The only person who seemed to keep choosing to be surprised was Vanessa herself. And I'm not saying that to blame her. I need to be really clear about that before someone clips 30 seconds of this and takes it out of context. I am not blaming Vanessa Santiago for what happened to her. The responsibility for her death begins and ends with one person and we're going to get to him. But if we're going to talk about this case honestly, and that is the only way I know how to talk, then we have to talk about the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Domestic violence doesn't look like what movies tell you it looks like. It doesn't look like a stranger in an alley. It doesn't look like someone you'd clock as dangerous the moment they walked into a room. It looks like someone who makes you laugh, someone who was there when you had your kids, someone your children call daddy, someone who on the good days is genuinely the person you fell in love with and that person is still in there somewhere just enough to keep you hopping, keep you staying, keep you telling your family. You don't understand him like I do. And by the time you understand that the person you fell in love with and the person hurting you are the same person, sometimes it's too late. Vanessa's sister said something in the aftermath of all this that I keep coming back to, she said. She would hide it from us, we just knew because of the boys. The 3-year-old was old enough to say that daddy hit me. A 3-year-old. This baby is 3 years old and he already knows that something in his house is wrong. He already has the vocabulary for it. Daddy hit me, and Vanessa is still there, still trying, still somewhere in her heart believing that this time would be different, that he would change, that the family she built was still salvageable. That is not weakness. That is what this thing does to people. That is the architecture of abuse. It doesn't cage you with locks and chains, it cages you with hope, with history, with children and shared last names and the absolutely devastating human capacity to love someone who is destroying you. And Frell Torres, he knew exactly what he was doing. This was not a man who snapped one day out of nowhere. This was not some tragic mental break that came without warning. The Torres family had a history of this. Violence ran through that family like a current. And Frell had been testing the system's limits for years, pushing, escalating, walking away without consequences every single time, until one morning in May, he decided to find out exactly how far he could go. The children were already at daycare. He had dropped them off himself that morning before he went back to that apartment. And in this episode, we are going to walk through exactly what happened minute by minute, officer by officer, room by room. From the moment the first 911 call came into the moment a jury came back after just 14 minutes of deliberation. 14 minutes, that's how long it took 12 people to look at the evidence and say, we've seen enough. We are going to talk about the body camera footage, the dried blood, the calls that were made before police were ever dialed, the prior incidents that were documented, filed, and then dropped again and again and again until there was nothing left to drop. We are going to hear from the officers on scene, from Vanessa's family, from the moments inside that apartment that the cameras captured and the human mind struggles to process. And by the end of this, I think you are going to understand why this case is not just about Frell Torres and Vanessa Santiago. It is about every name you've ever heard and forgotten, every case that got dropped, every she didn't want to press charges, every system that had every opportunity and still let someone fall through. This is for Vanessa, stay with me. 9:14 in the morning. That's when the first unit rolls up to the apartment complex in Castleberry, Florida, a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where kids draw on the sidewalk in the afternoons and neighbors wave at each other from driveways. The kind of place where nobody expects to show up for work and find what these officers found. The deputy arrives first. He's barely out of his vehicle when dispatch is already feeding him information: male subject on the premises, possible domestic incident, details unclear. What dispatch doesn't tell him yet, what nobody on that radio knows yet, is that there's nothing possible about it. It's already done. Has been done, in fact, for hours. But he doesn't know that, not yet. He approaches the building, one hand steady, eyes moving, and then the door opens. Frell Torres steps outside, his hands are visible, his face is wet, and the first thing anybody notices before the crying, before the words, before anything else is the blood on his hands. Not a little blood, not a scratch. The kind of blood that tells a story before a single word is spoken, dark, dried at the edges, the kind that's been there for a while. Officer Rodriguez arrives approximately 30 seconds behind the deputy. 30 seconds. In a different world, 30 seconds is nothing. It's the time it takes to pour a cup of coffee, to send a text, to change a song. But in police work, 30 seconds is a lifetime, and Rodriguez pulls up just in time to see Torres already on the ground, hands behind his back, the deputy moving with the kind of controlled urgency that every officer learns to perform under pressure. Rodriguez runs up with gloves already on, moves fast, secures Torres alongside the deputy. And Torres is not fighting, he is not running, he is not threatening anyone. He is on the ground, face pressed to the pavement of the complex parking lot, and he is sobbing, full body, broken open sobbing. The kind that doesn't sound like performance. The kind that sounds like a man who did something he cannot take back and has just in this moment arrived at the full weight of it. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. That's all he says, over and over, as Rodriguez pats him down, checks for weapons, secures his hands. No knife on him, no visible weapons. His clothing, and this matters, we'll come back to this, his clothing shows no significant blood, just his hands, just the hands that did it. Rodriguez stands him up, sits him against a vehicle, tries to get basic information. Two other officers, Kusk and Saki, go inside with the deputy to clear the apartment. Rodriguez stays with Torres, it's the right call. You never leave someone like this unattended, and you especially don't go chasing information from a man whose brain is currently operating somewhere between confession and breakdown. Inside, the officers move through the apartment. It's a lived-in space. Kids, things on the shelves, drawings maybe or toys, the small evidence of a life being built by a woman who was trying. They move past the kitchen, down the hallway. The back bedroom is on the right. One of the officers stops in the doorway. Yeah, it's bad, he says over the radio, and then a beat of silence, it's bad. Vanessa Santiago is on the floor to the right of the bed. She is dressed in pajamas, which tells you something right there because pajamas mean morning, pajamas mean she hadn't even had a chance to start her day. A kitchen knife is embedded in the right side of her temple, not near her, not on the ground beside her, in her, still there, like it had been placed. The blood on the floor around her is dry. She is cold to the touch. This did not just happen, this happened hours ago. which means that Frell Torres dropped his children off at daycare, put them in their car seats, walked them into the building, maybe kissed them on the head, knowing full well that their mother was lying dead on the floor at home. And then he called the police, waited, and stood outside crying. Let that settle, take a second, let that actually settle in your chest. Back outside, Rodriguez is working to get Torres calm enough to communicate. This is a delicate moment in any investigation. You want information, you need information, but you also know that anything this man says right now is going on camera, going into a report, and ultimately going in front of a jury. Every single word matters. Torres, between sobs, asks if he can go see his son. He wants to see his son. The son who is at daycare, who is safe, who does not know yet that his mother is never coming home. Rodriguez keeps his voice steady, calm, professional. He has a job to do and he's going to do it regardless of what he's feeling. Just stay here, he tells Torres, work with me. More units arrive. The yellow tape goes up. The crime scene log is started. Somebody notes the time, notes who touched what, notes who went inside and who didn't. Fire department rolls up, confirms no vitals on the victim and clears. There's nothing for them to do here. There's a camera mounted near the front door of the apartment, one of those home security setups, the kind people get when they're scared, which, if you've been paying attention, makes a lot of sense. Vanessa was scared. She had reason to be scared. The camera faces the entrance, positioned to capture whoever comes and goes. Officers spend time trying to get identifying information off the camera. Serial number, model, anything that would help them pull cloud footage. There's nothing on the back of it. It's mounted flush to the surface, anchored down. They note it and move on. They'll come back to this. Inside the car, the only vehicle on scene with a dash camera, Torres sits. Door closed, windows up. His face in his hands sometimes, head against the headrest other times. Rodriguez checks on him periodically. Other officers come and go. The family of the suspect arrives. A sister, the mother of Frell Torres. They pull up to the scene and the sister immediately starts talking, and what she says is the first major crack in the timeline that Torres gave when he said just now. He didn't call police first. He went to his family. He showed up at his mother's home, hysterical, covered in blood on his hands, saying, I'm sorry, and they told him to turn himself in. And then he left, tried to go see his son, was turned away, and only then called 911. So the question the investigators are now quietly sitting with is, how long was Vanessa on that floor? How many hours passed between when it happened and when those officers walked through that door? The dried blood says hours. Her body temperature says hours. And the man who did it spent those hours visiting family, trying to see his child, and apparently deciding when and how he was going to hand himself in. As if he had a choice, as if what he'd done was something you could manage, schedule, handle on your own timeline. That is not the psychology of a man who snapped. That is the psychology of a man who is used to controlling outcomes. Detectives are on their way. A search warrant is being drafted. And in a police car in a Florida parking lot, Frell Torres is still crying or performing crying, because at this point the officers can no longer tell the difference, and honestly it doesn't matter. The evidence doesn't cry. The evidence just sits there, dry and cold, waiting to be documented. The bunk beds are in the back room. Officers notice them immediately. The question that gets asked out loud in that careful cop way where nobody wants to say the scary version. Where are the kids? And Torres from the car says, school. But is it school? Is it daycare? Does he even know? Does he know anything at this point, or has he retreated to some interior space where the only thing that exists is the sound of his own crying? Officers start making calls. Someone needs to locate those children. Someone needs to make sure they're safe and they're not here and they didn't see anything. Someone needs to stand between these boys and the knowledge of what their father did to their mother for as long as humanly possible. Because they're going to find out eventually. Every child in this situation does, but not today, not in a parking lot, not surrounded by crime scene tape. Not today. Here's something they don't show you in the crime documentaries. They don't show you what it actually looks like when trained professionals walk into a room and have to process in real time something the human brain was never designed to witness. They don't show you the pauses, the controlled exhales, the way someone will say something clinical and procedural in a completely flat voice because that is the only voice available to them right now. They don't show you the bunk beds in the hallway, the kids' drawings still on the fridge, the coffee maker on the counter that someone was probably going to use that morning. They don't show you all the ordinary details of a life that got interrupted. But the body cameras showed all of it. Everything those officers saw, those cameras recorded. And it is, by any measure, one of the most difficult things to watch, not because of the gore but because of the everything else. Let me walk you through what the documentation of this scene actually looked like. When investigators enter the apartment, the first thing they do is establish a path. You don't just walk wherever you want in a crime scene. You move deliberately, noting every surface, every item, every detail that exists exactly as it was left, because the scene is evidence. The whole scene, not just the body, not just the weapon. Every unwashed dish and every out-of-place shoe and every overturned object is a data point. The front door opens into a main living area. Home security camera mounted just inside, the one officers already tried to pull a serial number from. It's live, powered recording, or it was. What it recorded in the hours before police arrived is now one of the most important questions in this investigation. Was the camera running when it happened? Did it capture what Frell Torres did to Vanessa Santiago? And if it did, where does that footage live? Most of these consumer-grade home security cameras store footage one of two ways. Either it goes to the cloud, an app on your phone, a subscription service, automatically uploaded, or it saves locally to an SD card inside the device which records over itself in a loop when the card fills up. This distinction matters enormously and investigators know it. The problem with the cloud option is that you need account credentials to access it. The problem with the SD card option is that every officer who has walked through that door, every sweep of the apartment, every procedural pass through the hallway could theoretically be recording over the exact footage they need. One of the senior investigators' eyes on the camera makes a decision. Nobody else goes in unnecessarily. The scene needs to be preserved. The warrant needs to include surveillance equipment, and until forensics arrives, that camera doesn't get touched. Smart, careful, exactly what you're supposed to do, which makes what comes later even more painful. The back bedroom. Officers walk the hallway and turn right. The bedroom is at the end, and this is where everything the scene has been quietly suggesting becomes undeniable. Vanessa is on the floor, right side of the bed. As if she fell or was moved or dropped, her body is positioned in a way that suggests she didn't walk there, she was there. The pajamas she's wearing are the same ones she went to sleep in. Maybe she never got up. Maybe it happened before she even had a chance to start her morning. The knife is still in her skull, right temple, a kitchen knife, the kind you find in any home, in any drawer, in any kitchen in America. He walked to the kitchen, he picked it up, he walked back, and then he used it. The blood on the floor around her is not wet, it is not fresh, it has had hours to oxidize and dry and settle. Crime Scene Investigation 101 blood color and consistency tells you approximate time. Bright red is recent. Dark, nearly brown, dry at the edges, that's time. That's the body's chemistry doing what it does. She is cold, to the touch she is cold. This happened, by best estimate, somewhere between 3 and 6 hours before the first officer walked through that door. While she lay there, the kids woke up, or maybe they were already up. And Frell Torres, this is the thing that the investigators keep coming back to, the thing that separates this from a crime of passion into something else entirely. Frell Torres got the kids ready, put them in the car, drove them to daycare, walked them inside, drove back, and then called 911. He functioned, he operated, he performed normalcy for those children while their mother was on the floor. Rodriguez takes photos, detailed, systematic photos that will eventually become evidence. The position of the body, the weapon, the blood pattern, the bedding, the surfaces, each image is a piece of a puzzle that a jury will one day hold. Outside, investigators are beginning to piece together a prior history. A report from March, just 2 months before this morning. Vanessa had called police. Torres had come through her window, not a door, a window, climbed in through the kitchen window in the night, had taken her phone, had refused to leave. She had eventually told him he could stay because the alternative, him getting arrested, the escalation that might follow, felt more dangerous than accommodation. She'd let him stay because saying no felt more dangerous than saying yes, and that tells you everything about the dynamic in that apartment. March's call ended with no arrest. She didn't press charges. Officers noted it, filed it, and moved on because that was all they could do. The law can only go as far as the victim allows in many of these situations, and Vanessa, for reasons that are heartbreaking and completely human, would not allow it to go far. Before March, there was 2021, a domestic incident with children present, same address, same dynamic, filed, documented, and ultimately dropped. Multiple calls, multiple reports, a pattern that in retrospect reads like a countdown. Back inside, investigators are noting an additional detail. Torres' clothing when he was apprehended showed no significant blood. His hands were bloody, deeply, visibly bloody. But his shirt, his pants, largely clean, which means one of a few things. He changed clothes between the incident and calling police. He was positioned in a way that minimized transfer during the act, or he was careful. They check the dumpsters on the property. Both are nearly empty, recently collected. If he disposed of clothing, it's gone. The warrant is being written. Investigators need access to everything in that apartment. The cameras, the cloud accounts, the phones, especially the phones. Torres had Vanessa's phone. He'd taken it before. The March incident was literally about him taking her phone. And there are indications, conversations between officers, references to prior recordings that suggest there may be audio from inside that apartment that nobody has heard yet. Think about that: a home security camera, a phone with location data, a voice recording possibly sitting in a cloud somewhere. In a case like this, every device is a potential witness. Meanwhile, the children have been located. They're at daycare, safe, unaware. An officer has gone by the facility to confirm they're there and to make sure nobody attempts to pick them up without authorization. Because the worst possible outcome in the middle of all this is someone panicking and moving those kids before CPS can be properly involved. The family of the deceased is starting to arrive at the perimeter. Vanessa's mother is on her way. She doesn't know yet, not fully, only that something is wrong enough that police are at her daughter's address and her daughter isn't answering her phone. Her sister has called out of work. Another sister is in a car somewhere driving. They are all moving toward the same moment. The moment where everything they feared but tried not to believe becomes real and confirmed and permanent. And inside that apartment, Vanessa Santiago is still on the floor, waiting in the way the dead wait patiently, absolutely, for the people who loved her to be told. Forensics is on the way. The ME has been called. The warrant is close to ready. And Torres, in the back of that police car with the dash cam recording every second, has asked for an attorney. He said one thing before the lawyer request, one thing about what happened between him and Vanessa that morning. He told investigators there was an argument. About the camera in the bedroom. The security camera that wasn't working. The camera, the one she put up because she was afraid, the one that stopped working at some point before all of this, the one that would have recorded everything if it had been on. He pushed a little more when they mentioned it, went quiet, then attorney. That's all he gave them. But the scene had already given them everything else. There is no good way to tell a mother that her daughter is dead. There is no training that fully prepares you for it. There is no script that softens it enough. There is no version of this moment that doesn't break something in the room, in the people delivering the news, in the people receiving it, in anyone within earshot who still has a functioning heart. And yet, it has to be done, every time, by someone, by people who chose a profession where this is part of the job description. The officers at the scene of Vanessa Santiago's murder had been dreading this moment since they got the call. They knew the mother was coming. They knew she didn't know the full extent of it yet. And they knew that the second she understood, the second the words landed and stuck, there was nothing on earth that was going to make it okay. Miriam, Vanessa's mother, arrives at the perimeter of the crime scene with the instinct of a woman who already knows, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that the worst has happened. She's been told only that something is wrong, that there are police at her daughter's address. She's been driving with that information sitting in her chest, probably telling herself it could be anything, it could be fine, Vanessa is okay, she's always okay. And then she pulls up and she sees the tape and the police cars and the number of officers and the look on the face of the first person who makes eye contact with her. And she knows. She knows before anyone says a word. An officer approaches her carefully, gently. This is a human being who has just arrived at the worst moment of her life, and she deserves to be treated with every ounce of dignity and care that can be offered in a parking lot outside a crime scene. Unfortunately, the officer says, your daughter's been found deceased. And Miriam goes somewhere. Her body stays, but something inside her leaves, because what she's been told is incompatible with the world she was living in 5 minutes ago, and the brain needs a moment to reconcile those two realities, and sometimes in that moment a person collapses or screams or goes completely silent or all three in sequence. Okay, 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 she says, over and over, like if she says it enough times it will mean something different, like it's an answer to a question she hasn't asked yet, like she's trying to absorb it through sheer repetition. Officers move to either side of her, hands out, not grabbing, just present. Ready, she goes down and they go with her, and someone says, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, in the soft, urgent rhythm of someone trying to prevent a fall. And then her daughters arrive. Kimberly pulls up in a navy blue Subaru. She's been behind her mother the whole drive, and she gets out of the car and takes one look at the scene, at her mother on the ground, at the officers surrounding her, at the tape and the number of vehicles, and she doesn't ask questions. She just moves. There's something about watching siblings respond to parental grief that is uniquely devastating. Because they're grieving too, this is their sister, but they haven't fully collapsed yet because someone has to hold the mother up. Someone always has to hold the mother up. Kimberly gets to her mother, crouches down. Mommy, mommy, mommy. Over and over, because what else do you say? What words exist for this? There are none. There has never been a language adequate to this moment, and there never will be. The younger children, Vanessa's sons, are not here. They are at daycare, safe, unaware. And every officer on scene is privately grateful for that. Grateful that those boys are somewhere with juice boxes and toys and the blissful ignorance of early childhood, because the alternative, them being here, seeing this, is too awful to contemplate. But they're going to have to find out. Today, someone is going to have to sit across from a 3-year-old and a child who is slightly older and figure out how to explain that their mother is not coming home. That's a different kind of notification, and it hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. One of the sisters, sometime during those first devastating minutes, asks a question that every person watching this video has probably already asked. What happened? What did he do to her? And the officer, with a steadiness that I genuinely do not know how human beings maintain, says, let me tell you a little later. Right now, just be with your family. He's not withholding out of cruelty. He's withholding because he knows what the answer is going to do to this family, and he knows they are not ready, and there is a version of mercy in buying them 5 more minutes where they know their daughter is gone but they don't yet know how. But Kimberly is not going to wait. She's read the room. She's seen the number of officers, the way the scene is cordoned off, the weight everyone is carrying. She pulls one officer aside quietly and asks directly. He stabbed her in the head with a knife. She goes still, completely still. The way people go still when information arrives that is simultaneously exactly what they feared and worse than they imagined. So it was quick, she says, so she didn't suffer. And the officer says, it was quick. Whether or not that's true, whether it happened exactly that way, is almost beside the point. What Kimberly needed in that moment was permission to believe that her sister didn't suffer, and she found it, and she held on to it. Because when you're standing in a parking lot in the Florida heat while your mother is on the ground and your sister is dead inside an apartment and your nephews are at daycare not knowing any of this yet, you hold on to whatever you can get. The family is moved to the van, out of the heat, out of the direct eyeline of the scene, with a little more privacy than the open parking lot offers. An officer sits with them, not interrogating, not pushing for information, just present, steady, doing the very underrated work of being a human presence in a moment when people need to not be alone. Kimberly, in the midst of everything, thinks about the practical things, the way the brain does when grief is too large to hold all at once and smaller tasks feel survivable. She thinks about calling work, about the boys' daycare, about whether she needs to tell her other sisters, about today being one of her sister's birthdays, because it is, and she hasn't forgotten, and there is something almost unbearably cruel about that specific detail landing on this specific day. Today was supposed to be a celebration, instead. One of the officers asks about the boys. The practical question, where are they, who can get them, who do they know and trust? Kimberly has the daycare information. She gives it over, and there's a quiet coordination happening now, officers, CPS, family, all converging on the same question. Where do these children go tonight? The answer, as far as this family is concerned, is obvious. They've been staying with my mom anyway, Kimberly says. My mom has a bedroom for them, she's always been there. She's registered as a guardian. The boys know her home. For them, sleeping at grandma's has never been unusual. Which means that for a little while, maybe a few days, maybe more, they can maintain some shadow of a routine while the adults around them figure out how to build a new world. We took them all the time, Kimberly says, because we were scared for their sake, we were scared for them. She says this quietly. She says it like a confession. Like there's guilt in it, the guilt of knowing the danger and still not being able to stop it, because they tried everything short of physically removing Vanessa from her own life, and Vanessa was an adult who made her own choices, and they had to respect that even when it was killing them. Even when it was ultimately killing her. The officer who stays with this family during these hours will later say it was one of the harder scenes he's been part of, not because of anything inside the apartment, but because of this. Because of these women holding each other up in a parking lot. Because of the way grief moves through a family like water through a system, filling every space. At some point, the family is offered and accepts the chance to go to the daycare, to be there when the boys are told, to be the familiar faces in the room when the world changes for two little kids who have no idea what's coming. Officers escort them, drive alongside, making sure that when those children look up and see family, they also see that they are not alone, that someone, multiple someones, is there. The mother of the suspect also arrives at some point during this window. Frell Torres' mother. She stands apart near the perimeter, and there is a complicated geometry to that moment. Two families, two sets of people who love different people in the same story, existing in the same parking lot with the same yellow tape between them. Nobody crosses the line, nobody escalates. Everyone is too exhausted and too broken for anything except grief. The sister of Frell Torres, who had spent the morning telling her brother to turn himself in, who had been trying to do the right thing even as her brother was doing the worst thing, sits in her car with her face in her hands. She's crying for reasons that are completely her own, and they're valid and they're complicated, and this is the thing about these cases that nobody likes to talk about. The ripple moves outward and it touches everyone. It touches the officers who will go home tonight and not be able to explain to their families why they're quiet. It touches the daycare worker who was just told to not let anyone pick up these particular kids. It touches the neighbor who saw the tape going up and realized she hasn't heard sounds from that apartment since yesterday. It touches the 3-year-old who will, at some point today, ask where mommy is. And someone is going to have to answer him. This is the part of the story where emotion has to step back and procedure has to step forward. Not because the emotion stops. It doesn't. Ask any detective who's worked a case like this and they'll tell you the emotion is always there, running underneath everything like a current you learn to work with rather than against. But the machinery of an investigation is built on precision, on documentation, on the kind of careful, methodical work that doesn't photograph well for television but is, ultimately, the thing that puts people in prison. And in the case of Vanessa Santiago, this machinery had a lot of work to do. Because here's the challenge: Torres had confessed, technically. He called 911 himself. He was crying in the parking lot saying "I'm sorry" before anyone asked him anything. But "I'm sorry" is not a conviction. "I blacked out" is not a conviction. For this case to hold, investigators needed a complete, airtight evidentiary package. Let's talk about the search warrant. Detective Aaron from the Major Crimes Unit starts drafting the warrant while officers are still processing the initial scene. A search warrant for a murder scene needs to be specific. You can't just say search the apartment. You have to list with reasonable particularity what you're looking for and why you believe it will be found there. Trace evidence, biological evidence, sharp-edged objects, cellular devices, identification documents. But there's something the initial draft almost misses: the cameras. Those home security cameras inside the apartment, the one by the front door, possibly others, are potentially the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. They need to be on the warrant, and a senior investigator catches this before it goes through and a line is added. While clearing the residence, officers observed surveillance equipment. That line, that one added line, could be the difference between admissible evidence and a legal challenge. This is what real investigation looks like, not the dramatic, fast-moving scenes from television. Real investigation is catching the thing you almost missed, adding the line. Making sure everything is documented correctly so that defense attorneys can't create holes later. Now the phones. Vanessa's phone had been taken by Torres in March. That's documented. He had a history of controlling her access to communication, which is textbook coercive control behavior. On the morning of May 29th, her phone was in the apartment. Officers were able to locate it during the initial walkthrough. But accessing the contents of someone's phone, even the victim's phone, requires either the phone's passcode or a separate warrant for the device's contents. This matters because phones carry everything now. Location history, messages, call logs, photos. If Vanessa had sent a text that morning, if she'd tried to call anyone, if there was a record of what was happening in those final hours, it was in that phone. Torres' phone was also on scene in his possession when he was apprehended. Same situation, they have it, but they need the right legal mechanism to get into it. The warrant language gets updated again. Forensics arrives. County forensics, not local, which tells you something about the resource coordination happening behind the scenes. Major crimes doesn't run a scene like this alone. There are people whose entire specialty is collecting trace evidence, processing blood spatter, documenting wounds, cataloging every item in that apartment with the kind of systematic precision that makes juries trust the case. The knife is the most critical item. It is still in situ, still embedded in Vanessa's skull when investigators first process the scene. This is unusual. Most perpetrators remove the weapon, dispose of it, make some attempt at cleanup. Torres did none of that. The knife stayed, the body stayed, everything stayed exactly where it was while he went and dropped the kids off and visited his family and ran his own private timeline. Which is strange, because someone who is trying to cover up a crime removes the weapon. Someone who is trying to control the narrative removes the weapon. The knife being left where it was suggests either that Torres was not thinking about consequences in those hours, or that he had already decided this was how it was going to end. The blood spatter analysis will come later from a lab, but even at scene, experienced investigators can read certain things. The pattern around Vanessa's body is consistent with the wound and her final position. There's no indication of significant blood elsewhere in the apartment, which suggests she didn't move after, which suggests it was, in the terminology, rapid. Torres' clothing is collected next. In a coordinated process between Corporal Caruso and forensics, they go through every item methodically. Shirt, pants, shoes, socks, each piece bagged and tagged. They note the absence of significant blood transfer, no major spatter on his clothing, which raises questions that forensics will have to answer. Blood transfer depends on proximity, angle, the nature of the wound, relative movement. A forensic photographer moves through every room. Every surface, every angle, every detail, the bunk beds, the kitchen, specifically the knife block or wherever the weapon was taken from, the bedroom, the position of the body, the window in the kitchen that Torres came through in March that he'd used as his own personal entrance that had probably been the source of more than one nightmare for Vanessa. Investigators pull the prior incident reports. March, trespassing, theft of phone, property damage, window entry, she didn't press charges. 2021 domestic incident, children present, case number documented, and there are references, conversation between officers near the perimeter of an even earlier report, something about a trespass warning, possibly damage to property. A pattern documented in black and white, sitting in the system going back years. There's also a conversation happening quietly among investigators about a case involving Torres' brother. The sister, Kimberly, mentions it. A domestic violence situation that escalated grotesquely. The brother's girlfriend, in a moment of drunken desperation or rage or both, had locked him in a suitcase. He suffocated. Violence as the normalized grammar of that family, not an excuse, an explanation. There are no excuses for what Frell Torres did to Vanessa Santiago. But understanding how people become what they become is not the same as excusing it. Understanding it is how you prevent the next one. The ME arrives and takes over custody of Vanessa's body. This is another step in the chain of custody, everything documented, every handoff logged. The official determination of cause of death will come from the autopsy, but the scene makes it clear. Penetrating head wound, consistent with the kitchen knife, consistent with the weapon still at scene. Torres is transported. He's invoked his right to counsel, which is his legal right. Anything he says from this point forward without an attorney present is inadmissible. Investigators know this. They're not going to push, they have enough. But not before he gives that one detail, that one crumb. The argument, he said, was about the bedroom camera not working. That's what started it. The camera, the security camera Vanessa had installed to protect herself, to have a record of what he did when no one was watching, had stopped working. And that apparently was the argument, that was the thing he blacked out over. Think about what that means. She put a camera in her bedroom because she was afraid, because she needed documentation of what happened inside those walls, and it stopped working, and he found out, and the argument that followed is the one that killed her. The camera she put up to protect herself became the thing that preceded her death. This is documented, noted, added to the investigative file. It establishes motive, such as it is. It establishes the trigger for the incident. It corroborates the timeline in ways that will matter at trial. The family canvassing continues. Officers knock on neighboring units. Does anyone know Vanessa? When did they last see her? Hear anything unusual? See tours coming or going? One neighbor confirms she hasn't heard anything from that apartment since the day before. Another mentions a car, not Vanessa's regular vehicle, that was parked nearby in the early morning hours. Every data point goes in, every data point matters. The children's information is secured through Kimberly, who has the daycare details on her phone. An officer goes to the facility, confirms the boys are there safe, and ensures that nobody attempts to pick them up without coordination. CPS is contacted. The mechanism of child welfare begins to engage, and what that looks like in practice is a phone call, and then another phone call, and then a case number, and then eventually a conversation with the grandmother about custody and guardianship. But that's tomorrow's work. Tonight, those boys need to be with family. By the time the afternoon arrives, the scene has been fully processed. Forensics has what they need. The warrant has been executed. The evidence has been collected, cataloged, signed off on. The apartment is sealed and will remain sealed until the legal process says otherwise. And somewhere in a county facility, Frell Torres is sitting with an attorney deciding how he wants to play this. He has options the way defendants always have options, even in the most open and shut cases. Plead, fight, delay, negotiate. He called the police himself. He was crying and saying sorry. He blacked out, he says. Maybe his attorney might suggest there's something to work with there. There isn't, but they'll try. The investigators know what they have. A documented history of domestic violence, a prior incident 2 months prior, a confession implicit if not explicit over police dispatch, a crime scene that told its own story before anyone opened their mouth, a family that had been trying to sound the alarm for years, and a jury that, as we'll see, would need exactly 14 minutes to decide what to do with all of it. Let's talk about what it actually takes to leave. Not in theory, not in the advice column version where it's presented as a decision, a choice, something you make one morning when you've had enough. Let's talk about what it actually takes, the logistical, psychological, financial, social, physical reality of trying to remove yourself from a relationship with a person who has spent months or years making themselves essential to your survival while simultaneously threatening it. Because Vanessa Santiago did not stay because she was weak. She did not stay because she didn't know it was dangerous. She did not stay because she had no one who loved her or offered her a way out. She stayed because the system that was supposed to protect her had failed her enough times that she had learned on a cellular level. That protection was not reliable. She stayed because her children shared a father with her abuser. She stayed because leaving is statistically the most dangerous time in a domestic violence situation, and Vanessa, consciously or not, probably knew that. The national domestic violence statistics are not comforting reading. The period immediately following separation is when the risk of lethal violence spikes most sharply. The moment you leave is frequently the moment an abuser decides that if they can't have you, no one will. Vanessa may not have been able to articulate this, but she may have known it in the way the body knows things before the mind catches up. Kimberly said it clearly, standing in that parking lot. Domestic violence is hard. And even that relationship, that bond, that attachment, it's more common than people want to admit. She's right, it is common, it is extraordinarily common, and every time a case like this makes the news, a percentage of the people watching recognize something in it. A relationship they've been in, a person they've loved, a door they were afraid to walk out of. This episode is for those people too, not just for Vanessa. Let me tell you about what was documented in Frell Torres' history before that morning in May 2021, a domestic incident at the same address. Children present, case filed, no prosecution, charges dropped. Investigators note the children's presence. CPS is presumably notified. The case enters the system and stays there, closed, unresolved. March 2024, Torres enters the apartment through a kitchen window. At night, he takes Vanessa's phone. He refuses to leave. She eventually allows him to stay because, and this is the part that breaks your heart, she felt that saying yes was safer than saying no. Officers respond. She does not press charges. Report filed. Torres walks 2. Documented incidents in 3 years with children present with escalating behavior, window entry, property theft, physical proximity that terrified her enough to install a security camera. And on both occasions, he walked away without lasting consequence. His family had also called police on him, his own family. There had been an incident where Torres pulled a knife on family members, not Vanessa, his own people. They pressed charges, and then they dropped them. Everyone dropped them every time. Not because they didn't care, because the system doesn't make it easy to hold on, because the pressure that abusers apply to victims, to families, to anyone who might testify against them is relentless and specific, because courts move slowly and abusers are present and immediate, because going forward with charges means confrontation, testimony, retaliation, and every person in Frell Torres' orbit had already learned what he was capable of. And still they warned, and still they begged, and still Vanessa stayed. The brother mentioned by Kimberly at the scene had been killed by his girlfriend, locked in a suitcase and suffocated. A story that sounds almost impossible until you understand the environment it emerged from. A family where violence was the vocabulary, where control and force were the tools of relationship, where this was, in some devastating way, what love looked like. Frell Torres grew up watching this, breathing it, learning it. This is not a defense, it is a context, and the difference between those two things is everything. The trial of Frell Torres for the second-degree murder of Vanessa Santiago was, in many respects, not a complicated case. Prosecutors laid out the evidence. Torres had stabbed Vanessa multiple times with a steak knife. The knife was recovered from the scene, still embedded in her skull. Torres' own 911 call was played. His movements that morning, dropping the children at daycare, visiting family, attempting to see his son, were documented. His statement to investigators about the argument over the camera was on record. And the history of domestic violence, the prior incidents, the pattern of escalation, all of it admissible, all of it devastating to any claim of sudden, uncontrollable action. The defense, as expected, leaned into the blacked-out language Torres had used in those early hours, an argument that got out of hand, a mental state that couldn't be fully accounted for, anything that might complicate the straightforward narrative the prosecution was building. The jury was not convinced. After all the testimony, after all the evidence, after watching body camera footage and hearing from investigators and seeing the prior reports and understanding the full arc of this relationship, the jury deliberated for 14 minutes. 14 minutes. Not 14 hours, not 14 days, 14 minutes. Less time than it takes to drive across town, less time than the average lunch break. Frell Torres was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He will die in there? That is what life means. He will grow old inside a facility surrounded by people who know what he did, and he will never drop anyone off at daycare again, and he will never climb through anyone's window again, and he will never take anyone's phone again. For Vanessa's family, this is something. It is not enough, it will never be enough, but it is something. It is the system finally, after years of dropped charges and closed reports and failed interventions, doing the thing it was supposed to do. Too late but correctly. Vanessa's boys are with their grandmother. They are in the bedroom she always kept for them, in the home they always knew as a second home, surrounded by the people who loved their mother and who will spend the rest of their lives making sure she is not forgotten. The 3-year-old who told his aunt that daddy hit me will grow up knowing that what his father did was wrong, that it was not normal, that the cycle ends here. That's what Vanessa's family is determined to give them, a different story than the one they inherited. There are things this case should change. It should change how we handle repeat domestic violence offenders who continue to walk after charges are dropped, because the charges being dropped is not the same as the behavior stopping. The behavior continues, escalates, the file gets thicker, the risk gets higher, and the system, without mandatory mechanisms to intervene regardless of victim cooperation, has no tools. It should change how we fund and resource domestic violence advocacy, because Vanessa's family tried. They tried to get her out, get her to therapy, get her away. But the support structures, the safe housing, the legal advocacy, the trauma-informed counseling are chronically underfunded, chronically overstretched, and frequently inaccessible to the people who need them most urgently. And it should change how we talk about domestic violence as a community. Because why didn't she just leave is not a question, it is a failure of imagination. It is what people ask when they have not been afraid enough, dependent enough, isolated enough, or hopeful enough in exactly the wrong direction. It is a question that puts the weight of survival on the person least positioned to carry it. Vanessa Santiago was not responsible for Frell Torres' violence. She was responsible for two little boys who loved her, for a mother who would go to the ground at the news of her, for sisters who dropped everything immediately, no questions asked, for a community that is still, in the wake of all this, asking the questions that don't have easy answers. She was a person, a full, complicated, loved, imperfect, trying, hopping person, and she deserved better from every system that ever had her name in a file and did not do enough. Her name was Vanessa Santiago, she was 29 years old, she had two little boys, and she deserved to live. If Vanessa's story moved you, share this video. It matters. Every share is another person who learns her name. Subscribe to Time with X for more stories told with the respect and honesty they deserve. And please, if you know someone in a situation like this, send them this episode. It might be the thing that changes everything.